talk about the technology stack, so we have been working into microservice based architecture, where most of the services are there into Spring Boot itself. Few of them are there in Python and Golang as well. For inter-service communication, we are using Kafka. Apart from that, in few services we also have certain REST endpoints exposed for the UI to actually interact with our backend services. Apart from that, we are using MongoDB for storing our data, and Docker for Docker containers for testing and deployment purpose. We are also using Mockito and JUnit for unit testing. And apart from that, we are using Git as versioning tool, Jira, Jenkins, etc. tools like that.
Okay. About MongoDB, tell me what is the basic difference between NoSQL and SQL databases?
Yeah, so basically, NoSQL databases are used for saving unstructured data, whereas SQL databases are actually used for storing structured data. Basically, so into NoSQL DBs we have documents, and in SQL DBs we have tables to actually store the data.
Okay, and from transaction perspective, what's the difference between them?
Yeah, so basically, relational databases maintain the asset properties that are there for a particular transaction, basically. And in case of NoSQL databases, like you can also like maintain into them as well, but yeah, you need to actually. So in case of SQL databases, you can say that SQL databases are better because if you talk about transactions, whereas NoSQL databases have unstructured data, so you need to manually through code maintain the properties, ACID properties for that.
So does NoSQL databases has same kind of transaction as database?
I actually
Like,
haven't worked on SQL databases. Like in NoSQL, we usually use the Spring transaction management. We have to manually, do everything, like manually use either a transactional annotation and manually do the everything rollback and everything. And for multi-threaded environment, we have to do the locking ourselves using the optimistic locking techniques and things like that.
okay. And what is the eventual consistency in NoSQL databases?
Sorry, please come again. Eventual.
Eventual consistency.
Uh, do you mean something like, suppose I am actually updating, I have suppose multiple threads that are trying to update the same row, and one thread updates it and the other thread is not able to update it, so that will actually create inconsistency problems. So I think it's a kind of consistency.
What's like this? Okay, let's say we have a cluster of MongoDBs, for example, okay?
Okay.
And we write to one of them. Obviously, when we write to another first. Then, at the same time, another thread and comes and read the data.
Yeah.
Does it the latest data? It may be from another node.
Okay. Yeah.
Does it get same data response? Does it get same data that is written in the other node?
So basically there is a concept of replication as well. So if you are immediately doing at the same time you are doing that operation, there might be some inconsistency issue. Suppose there I have a row where some value is suppose 52, age is 52, and two threads got the same value at the same time, one thread updated it, so that will actually create inconsistency issue, for which we actually use optimistic locking, so that as soon as some thread read it, we use the version concept into that. For example, initially I have suppose version as 1, so two threads read that particular row and one thread actually updated it, so version automatically increment to 2, and as soon as the other thread goes to actually update it, earlier on it had version 1 and now version has been incremented to 2, so now it will throw actually optimistic locking exception because data is not updated. So this actually helps to maintain the consistency issues.
So how does it help? Because if I'm writing with number 2, another thread also come and write number 2 may overwrite my changes.
No, actually one thread will be able to write, right? So with version 2, only one thread will be able to write. And as soon as it writes, it will actually update the version. So version will be updated to 3. So automatically the other thread will fail.
So you mean you lock a record on that table? Does MongoDB has concept of record locking?
No, it doesn't lock actually. It maintains, you can say it maintains the version values. It doesn't put a lock on it. It just checks if the version that the particular thread is trying to update, that version is actually same into the database. If that is different, the save part or update part is going to fail.
Okay. Okay, so more on the threading. Let me share my screen. I'm going to ask you to about
Sure.
to open my computer.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sharing my screen.
Sure.
You see my screen now, yes?
Yes, yes, it is visible.
Okay. So this is a singleton class, right?
Okay.
Tell me what issue you see in case on this thread and multi-threading. What issue you will see used in the multi-threaded environment?
Okay. So you have this, okay. So if in case we have like multiple threads that will actually try to access this get instance method. So what will happen if two threads enter at the same time initially when the object is not created or instantiated? So it will actually, if multiple threads get into the same time, they will check this if condition and they will find it to be null. And so basically into multi-threaded environment, it will be able to, it may be able to create more than one instance of this class singleton basically.
Okay, and how do you fix that?
We can do that using the synchronized block, so that one thread can actually enter it once at a time.
So let's say we synchronize something like this. Okay, yeah.
Okay.
You're saying we can fix that. What issue will cause if we are synchronized here?
So this will have performance issues basically. It's a kind of, you are actually putting. There are multiple ways in which you can use synchronize. So you are using here synchronized method. So it will actually, this particular method can only be accessed one by one thread at a time. So suppose if an instance is already created and multiple threads are trying to access it, then it will hamper the performance of this particular thing. So basically we can use the synchronized block instead of synchronized method over here. That
So if let's say we reduce it to here, you will see the scope will be smaller, but it still exists. The issue still exists.
so we
In
can
this,
yeah, so I think the best way to do it is we can actually use double check with synchronized block. I mean, you can first check if that is equal to null, and inside that you can have a synchronized block inside which you can again check if that is equal to null. So basically, in case of double check, if that is already created, so it will actually check, okay, this is already not equal to null, so it will not even go to the synchronized block. Only the first time when thread has to be created, then only it will go to the synchronized block. Otherwise it will improve the performance.
so you're saying only if it's null, then you try to use a synchronized block.
Yes, yes, we can have a if check before this as well.
Do
Like
you
if
know any other way of fixing it?
apart from synchronized, do you want that?
Yes.
Okay.
There are two different other way of fixing it without using synchronized.
Okay. Without using synchronized. So, in a multi-threaded environment, let me just think. Synchronized.
Yeah. Have you used enum?
Yes, yes. So enum, yeah, there is only one instance of it. Yeah, we can actually use enums here.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
And there is another way of using it in the initialization. Say I can say here equal for instance, yes.
Sorry, please come again.
Another way of, for example, putting something like this here. I'm sorry, uh, like this. Does
Yeah.
it solve it? Yeah, something like this. Why is it doing that? I want to copy only this part. Alright, so this will also solve it.
So you are actually doing a private static and you are actually
But
creating
then
this.
I don't need even this, so just let's say this.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. This will also work.
No. So now we had good conversation so far about optimistic locking and pessimistic locking. And tell me what is caching level 2 in the Spring in JPA?
What is caching?
Level 2.
Caching level 2, I am not aware of. I just want. Sorry.
When you're using the JPA or Hibernate, there are a couple of caching involved. One of them is level 1, the other one is level 2. Okay.
I'm not aware of level 1 and level 2 caching.
It's okay. So let me continue. In case of okay, what is the interface versus abstract class? When do you use interface? When do you use abstract class?
So basically interfaces are used in case where we have like for example multiple abstract methods which we can actually implement into different classes and provide their functionality, whereas in case of abstract class we can have abstract along with the concrete methods as well. So suppose I have like I want some kind of functionality. Suppose I have a vehicle. Okay, and I have types of vehicle like for example two-wheeler, three-wheeler, four-wheeler. I want color to be the same for all those vehicles, two-wheeler, three-wheeler, four-wheeler. So I can actually use an abstract class and extend it into my child classes, and I can have like a concrete method color which returns blue into my abstract class. I do not need to provide its implementation everywhere. I can provide it directly into the parent class and all the classes will be able to take it. Whereas in case of interface, it actually when you want for example multiple inheritance is not supported, but in cases when you want behavior of different interfaces or methods into your classes, so multiple multi level multiple you can implement multiple interfaces into your particular class basically. So if in case you want to provide like abstract methods, you just want to provide the methods, so you use interfaces. In case you have some common functionality that has to be provided as part of your parent and you do not want to actually provide it separately for all your child classes, in that case we basically go for abstract classes.
What is new in Java about interfaces?
Yeah, so with Java 8, basically into interfaces, Java 8 has introduced functional interfaces where you can also provide abstract and default methods as well.
Okay, great. So let's switch to a Spring. What is the main reason you people using a Spring?
Yeah, so with Spring, basically you can have like, for example, we are using Spring Boot. So you have to make very less configuration, and the developer just have to worry about the business logic. Most of the configurations are already auto configured into Spring, and you can actually create production ready applications very easily. Also with Spring Boot, we can use microservices based concept where we can actually make our application scalable scalable. And also you can have like with Spring Boot, it comes with embedded Tomcat server where you, as soon as you start your application, it gets deployed automatically. So basically it reduces the overhead over the developer to actually configure different things.
Okay. I'm most specifically asking for a Spring, not a Spring Boot. What is the main reason you use a Spring itself? A Spring Boot, yeah, right. No, I'm asking why do you use the Spring?
So you can have like you can create services into Spring which can be used by any into any platform, and they are actually you can use it on any of the platform. Apart from that, you can actually have it like you can have different endpoints exposed into it. Some other service written into some other language can also get the data from your particular application that you have into Spring. It is very easy to integrate the rest as well as this other
Okay.
things like queues.
My concern was dependency injection.
Okay.
Okay. One of the main reasons people are
Yeah.
using it is for dependency injection. So now that about dependency injection, you're familiar with that, yes?
Yes, yes.
How does it work? How Spring can do that?
Yeah, so basically dependency injection is majorly used for loose coupling. So suppose I have like a particular, you can say, I have, suppose for example I have a controller, and I am going to use a service layer for that. I'm going to call the service layer into it. So actually at the time of bean creation, I can inject the dependency of service using, you can use at the rate auto wide annotation, and you can actually inject the dependency of that service and use it over there. Also in cases if you are creating a bean and you want to actually provide certain values, like there is some string, there is some integer or something like that, you want to actually pre-populate them, you can also do that by constructor and setter injection. It is basically of two types.
So my question is that how Spring does that? I know what you're saying. You're saying it we can use it this way, but what is underlying it? How does Spring does the dependency injection? Is there is put it this way? If I have a Spring Bean object, is it same as a Pojo object or is it different?
No, basically, as soon as you create bean into Spring, so basically the entire life cycle of that particular bean is actually maintained by the Spring container itself. This is not similar to some Pojo object. So the entire life cycle has to be maintained by the Spring container. It knows inside the context you always have what that particular bean is, what are its values, what it is related to. So in this way it is actually different from a normal Pojo that you have.
Okay. Okay. What about aspect oriented AOP? Have you used AOP?
Yes, I have used it like very basic of it, like for example I have created point cuts to actually execute it on at the
Okay.
calling of my code basically.
Okay. So let's switch subject a little bit. Now let's say we have a website. I want to know we use HTTPS in the website?
Yeah, so we use HTTPS for security related purposes. Like HTTPS is actually accessing the website in a safe manner, and there is a lot of, like, for example, security part is also involved as part of that. So basically, it is the communication from browser. It is the communication between the browser and server that is used to actually protect your server from attackers, just to secure your entire communication basically.
Okay, so how does it protect us from attacker?
I think it actually does, you can say, a kind of as soon as, like, you hit some request from the client, it actually does some kind of SSL handshake between the client and the server.
Okay, so I have a question. Let's say I have a certificate and the computer crashed and I lost everything on that computer,
Okay.
the private key. Can I get the certificate, the same certificate again if I request it from whoever issued the certificate for me?
So you have a client browser, right? And you have a
Or
server.
let me put it this way. Can you explain to me how do you issue a certificate?
Yeah, that is actually signed by. There are a set of steps that you have to take care for it. Like, you have a trust store, you have a key store, and that is basically a signed certificate that is issued by CA certification authority, something like that.
Okay. Okay. And if a certificate itself signed, can they still use it?
Sorry, please come again.
If a certificate, first time, okay, we have a private key, then we create certificate for it.
Yeah.
Now, is it good to use, or what is the issue with the self-signed certificate? The one that is not, we don't have certificate authority from the, like a VeriSign or some major company. It's just the one that we issue by ourselves.
So you are talking about what are the disadvantages of using a self-signed certificate, is it? Or what are the
Yes,
issues
yeah,
with
tell me that.
self-signed?
What is the disadvantage of that?
I think in case of using self-signed certificate, that is basically created by a particular, you can say, a particular server, onto a particular server. So I think there is not. I'm not actually, honestly speaking, very sure of what are the disadvantages of it. Yeah.
So let's go to microservices a little bit more and HTTP. There is a key, HTTP verbs, yes.
Yes.
Okay, what is the option used for?
Options. Okay. It's a kind of this HTTP method that we use. Options. I'm not able to recall why that is used.
Okay. You know what is course? CORS
Yeah, course
in
filters
HTTP.
are there that we actually configure while accessing the backend from the UI. Cross origin.
When do you need that?
So basically, like, we actually have those filters. Suppose some request is coming from the UI, so we actually have to configure that in the backend. Okay, this request will be coming from this particular place basically. So this will be considered as we can access from the backend, and this will be considered as a valid request coming from a valid source.
Okay. So now tell me this. Let's say I ask you to set up a REST API. how do you make sure this API or this application is scalable?
So you are actually asking me to create an endpoint and scaling it. So scalability is something related. Yeah.
I'm talking about an application. Let's say a web store or something, and then we want to make sure if one of the node crashes, the other node can continue its work.
So that is actually like we have a for example a microservice, a particular microservice that is running, and we have multiple instances of it to actually serve the requests that are coming from some client. So in those cases, if suppose like in our case we do have like an API gateway, along with that we have a service discovery naming server. We are using Eureka for that. So it actually registers all the services along with their instances onto it. And suppose if some instance goes down, so it has like up keyword, and it has multiple instances that are running onto your different kind of ports. So as soon as a request comes in from the client, it actually checks through the service discovery which instance is up. So as soon as it gets, okay, this particular instance is up and it is running on this particular port, it actually goes to hit that particular instance basically.
Who does that? Who does that? Who does the service discovery and send the request to a specific instance?
So that is actually done by API gateway. We are using Zool over there.
Okay. It basically an API gateway or load balancer
Yeah.
does that. Okay. So now tell me this. Let's say a website, it has a session, okay? And how do you make sure when if the server, one of the instances crash, the session doesn't destroy, you still can use it?
Sorry, I didn't got your question. Like I have one server.
Let's say that there are multiple instances of this API, this REST API. And now we have an application that is a session-based, like a shopping cart.
Okay.
How do you make sure that if the session created in the browser, it does not fail if one of the nodes crash?
Session created in the browser does not fail.
Then you store the session. How do you keep the session data?
In the client you are mentioning, or in the backend services?
In the backend.
Yeah, so basically we have like for every particular session we have a specific dedicated service that is actually taking care of all the user related sessions, so that we call it as user management. Over there we are actually managing the entire thing.
Okay. So tell me this. You're familiar with linked list?
Yes.
Okay. How do you detect if there is a loop in the linked list?
Okay, so suppose I have one particular node. So like from the start I will start. So if there is a loop, that means some particular node will be pointing to some previous node into that linked list. So we can have like if you talk about traversing that linked list to find out if there is a loop, like I can have two different you know references to that particular linked list. It will actually point to the head, and then I will actually move it, like one reference I will move it to next, and the previous one also. Okay, in that case I will not be able to see if there is this loop. Okay, in that case I think it is that start and one reference is there. It is moving ahead. The next, basically the next node of some particular this next will actually be pointing to some node that I have already traversed. So in that case like okay, I can have like one pointer moving like onto jumping onto uh, once at a time, and other one will be actually jumping, you can say twice. So suppose I have it initially, and the other pointer I have moved twice, and one will be moving to suppose one position again. It moves to 4, and this will move to 1. So likewise, this I can actually check if next of that particular node actually points to some node that I am currently referring to.
Okay, so one of them is run with goes with one jump one at a time, the other jump two at a time or four at a time, you said?
Yeah, yeah. So it will actually jump 2 at a time.
Okay. And what does it detect that if it's a loop?
So the one actually jumping 2 at a time, I can always check if next of that particular node, I mean, if actually they ever point to the same node. So the one moving 2 at a time, the next of that is actually pointing somewhere to the previous of my first node. So they point actually to the same node once. So that means there is a loop.
Okay. So there are different implementation of hash table.
Okay.
Can you tell me which one would you use for performance in a multi-threaded environment?
Uh, okay. So you are talking about hash table or hash map?
Hashmap.
Okay. Yeah, so I think the best option is concurrent hash map in case of multi-threaded environment. The reason being that you can also have like synchronized map, but that will actually lock the entire object. But in case of concurrent hash map, on the read operation, it actually doesn't lock anything. If you are performing a write operation, it will actually lock that particular segment onto which write operation is being performed. So in that way, it is actually better in performance as compared to synchronized map.
Okay, so there are segmented keys there that they can help
Yes.
by locking a specific segment, so we have less chance of locking entire hashmap. Okay, good. So let me think. So you use Python also? You said you work with Java as well as Python?
No, actually, I just worked with Java. Never.
Okay, because I heard something. Okay, maybe I missed. Let me say. Okay, so I assume you're not familiar with cloud, yes? You don't work on the
No.
cloud. Oh, it's fine. It's fine. We're not. We are completely on the cloud, but this job position we don't need cloud knowledge. I mean, you will learn it on basis. So if you want, if you have a memory leak issue in a Java application, how do you try to find it?
Okay. There is a memory leak issue. So possibly like there are you can say for memory leak in those cases we can actually like use the best practices basically to see okay how much. So I think there are multiple tools using which you can actually, when you run your application, you get to see okay these this much is the CPU usage and this much is the memory usage. So in those cases basically like you can actually use some kind of, I'm not able to recall, but there are some tools that we use for performance related monitoring. So there.
So tell me a case that memory leak can happen.
Okay, so okay, in case of memory leak, I think when basically there are multiple, you can say there are a lot of unreferenced objects that are occupying the space into the heap, and you can say there are a lot of static fields that are holding certain object references.
unreferenced objects aren't eligible for garbage collection?
Yes, so basically, unreferenced objects are actually eligible for garbage collection, but in case you are not properly doing the cleanup, in that case, there will be certain objects that will be pointing to some memory location. Apart from that, suppose garbage collection doesn't happen as soon as, I mean, it is not under your control. It actually is done by JVM. Like, you can actually, using the system.gc or something like that, you can actually request the JVM to clean up the entire thing, but that is not done immediately. As soon as JVM as soon as you request, after some time, whenever JVM starts it, then only it will be actually garbage collected and the memory can be cleaned up. Apart from that, there can be a certain you do not actually, inside the finally block, you do not close the resources properly, or there are certain memory locations which you are pointing to. So in those cases, like suppose file and buffers, whatever buffer reader or whatever readers you are using, they are not properly closed, or things like this can actually lead to memory leak issues.
Okay, let's say a simple example would be a hash map that we keep on adding item to it and we don't remove from it. Yes.
Yeah, yeah, in that
It
case
would
also, yes.
actually, if you have the primary key, some UUID, something randomly generated, and we keep on adding to it, obviously it goes out of memory sooner or later. Okay. And yes. Okay, so let me see how much time we have. I can explain a little bit also about the company. I should maybe start sooner. I don't know if others explain to you the job, what we do here at Sony.
They actually didn't mention me about the project that you guys are actually working on, maybe due to some privacy. So they
Okay. Okay. So the team that we're working is called Global Payment Tax and Fraud, and our department mostly is on payment side of it.
Okay.
But we work closely with others like tax, fraud especially. Okay, and we are implementing new payment methods for PlayStation, and these are including some special API gateway. We want to use a special payment gateway window we want to implement, so we want to add a different method of payment to the we are the back end of the Sony PlayStation Store, for example, or where whenever you go buy a PlayStation game, they call the API to authorize the purchase and things like that, or adding payment method to your account AWS PlayStation. All services are all on AWS cloud, and all stack with the Spring Boot. Basically, sometimes we use database like Oracle, and sometimes we use NoSQL, so we use DynamoDB mostly. In most payment project, we use Oracle because of the transaction issue, because as you know, if the eventual consistency doesn't guarantee that if you write, you can read in the same time. It means it eventually will be there, but doesn't guarantee that it's right away, like it will protect it. And what else? Yeah, we have, as I said, it's mostly Spring Boot and Java 8, because the EC2 we're using, it's AWS EC2s are Java 8, and they're already pre-configured. What else? Do you have any other question? Any question for me?
Yeah, I would just okay. You have already mentioned the technology stack and the project. I think I'm good with it.
Okay, so I think we are good at this time. I don't have any other question.
Okay.
If you don't have any other, I'll give you 15 minutes back. You can go back to.
Sure.
Like, okay. Thank you for your time.
Thanks. Thank you
I
so much.
appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a good day.